All righty, great. All right. Well, I have the pleasure today of introducing Jesse Michael. Jesse and I have known each other now, what, probably a dozen years. We've
Yeah.
been collaborators. Um, Jesse's main research interests are in work-family interaction and occupational health psychology. Jesse is director of the IO PhD program at Auburn University, and he's published in all the big journals that we're familiar with in IO: um, Journal of Management, Journal of Vocational Behavior, um, Journal of Organizational Behavior, and he has a lot of experience using Mturk, especially in recent years. And I know a lot of folks in our department use Mturk, and I think there's lots of like little nuts and bolts, practical, specific advice that can kind of help you get the most out of Mturk. And Jesse knows a lot about those nuts and bolts. So I'm going to turn it over to Jesse, and he's going to talk about his experience using Mturk.
All right, great. So I'm going to start this meeting like most of them nowadays is how do I share my screen using this? So we use Zoom, and I have never used the WebEx before.
Do you see anything at the very bottom that says share?
Oh yeah, I see it. So at least I'm not a cat, you know? Um, so have you all seen that video? So it's actually pretty hilarious. I had an interesting, I I'm very informal, so like most of my talks, people either love it or hate it. But I remember I was formerly at FIU, and we were interviewing a guy that was in Seoul, South Korea, and the huge time difference. So before we brought him on campus, we were doing virtual interviews, and at that time not to go off on something, but my computer, like Google Chrome, and the Skype was linked to my home computer. My son would go on and like turn himself into a cat, just the exact same cat. So I go in on this interview being all like, "Hey, nice, assistant professor," and I pop up first in like, I think it was a rocket ship, and then like I'm trying to get it rid of it, and then I turn into a cat, and I thought it was the best interview I've ever been in. But it was fantastic. And then I saw the news and the guy's a cat, and I'm like, all right. So you can see the screen that I'm sharing, right? All right. So yeah, as Nathan said, I'm just going to talk about Amazon's Mechanical Turk. I've been using this for a while. So our students are very traditional, you know, they come from high SES background. They're all like 18 to 22. And I do work family research. So, and it's a small town. It was a tougher time to get going, and I had fun. So I started using MTurk a little more. So that's kind of how I started using this. And I've been very excited, and I've published like MTurk paper on using this as a sampling mechanisms for occupational organizational research. So yeah, as Nathan said, I'm just very familiar with it. So I'm excited to give this talk. So the agenda today, just to briefly overview what MTurk is. So what is it? Who are the participants? What are some advantages, disadvantages? And I can talk about my experiences. Some of it's going to be based on actual data, some published research, and some of it will just be more anecdotal, my experiences through the publication process with MTurk data. And then I can do a quick tutorial. So Nathan mentioned like a tutorial. So a lot of the experiences that I've had is both a major professor. I teach statistics here, so students come to me a lot of times. I teach research methods and stats. So if they have questions about data collection, they come to me. And these are just a lot of experiences that I've had. And most of it is how do I create an account? How do I collect data? How do I screen data? How do I make sure, reviewer two is concerned about bots because they read a blog? How do I address these things? So I can talk about these a lot. So, all right, what is Mturk? So Mturk, if you go on their website, they position it really well because they sell a service. So they refer to it as a global marketplace, a 24/7 workforce. They use some other catchy terms, but basically it's a virtual marketplace where anyone can sign up and both be a worker, right? A worker and a requester. So I signed up to be a requester. So I have a requester account, but also I think just by default, I get a worker account. And I've been interested from both perspectives. After I started collecting data, I wanted to see from their perspective. So I've actually taken a number of surveys just to see what they go through. And I've taken a total of 13 surveys and have made.
Hey, Jesse, can you hear me? I think you're frozen again.
Am I still
Hey, Jesse,
frozen?
just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, you're unfrozen now. I wonder if you turn your camera off if it'll stop freezing. Sometimes
Yeah,
that
I can
helps.
do that. So I've noticed the last couple of days, let me figure out how to turn off my camera.
It should be down by the share button you clicked earlier. It might stay. I think the stop video maybe, or I don't know. Or does
Okay,
that kick
I
you
see
out?
it. Stop sharing, stop video. All right.
That works.
All right. I know, I think, I'm in the South. I might be affected by the extreme weather. So I've noticed the last few days my internet has been kind of going in and out. So I do apologize for that. So, um, so yeah, basically it's a virtual marketplace where we can sign up to both take surveys or do work, and then also people can, post work. So I don't know how much I cut out, but basically people are submitting what we refer to as hits, these human intelligence tasks, and they can take place from anything from the social science research that what we post, but a lot of people are actually putting on other work. So audio and video transcriptions is something that you see a lot. So people will post audio transcriptions, they will hire others to actually transcribe it. And these end up taking hours and they'll pay quite a bit of money to do it. There's just various Excel worksheets. I've seen things on YouTube ratings. So it's kind of a whole assortment of different kits that people are posting on there. But over the last few years, we've really seen researchers capitalize on this opportunity and start posting social science research. So whether so the highest paid hit was $20. And this is basically, actually, I would have to go, I have a couple slides later that goes more into the description, but basically this hit is available for somebody to take up to 20 times. So a lot of times you'll see like transcription work where you can take multiple jobs. The next two surveys you can only take once. All of these I'm locked out of as a participant because I do not meet their criteria. So I'll go over the different ways of creating criteria for your participants, but I do not meet these in the sense that I don't even know what the criteria are, but I'm not eligible. So um, here's another screenshot of a little more description. So that first one, they're collecting audio clips. You record about a 1 minute clip. You send in the MP3 file, and as long as it's between 50 and 150 megabytes. And then, yeah. So the criteria for their study is the participant has to be, or the worker has to be located in the United States. And you can see that it shows me being in Alabama. You have to have a hit approval rating. So these are the number of hits that you've done, and they have been approved as you have completed this successfully. So as I mentioned, I've only done 13 surveys, and that was just me being curious on what it looks like from a worker perspective. So I just went in and did the first 13 surveys, and they were just simple. Um, I think I did a couple psychological surveys that were pre-screened, and then I did some demographic surveys. And then I called it a day. I did a total of 13 surveys. And so therefore, I meet their requirement. So if I said, okay, you have to complete at least 50 surveys, I wouldn't meet the requirement. And then this last one is just a requirement that that participant or this worker or researcher made, right? And this is probably a way to screen out participants. So people that have taken a previous survey. So I didn't take a previous survey, so I'm not in here. So this is basically the interface that the workers have. So who are these workers? I think is an important question, especially for IO psychologists and researchers. We want to make sure that it's a generalizable sample, right? So I've been most interested, from a research perspective, is sample adequacy. So I'm really interested in that. And for my type of research, I think Mturk is pretty good. So this is a study that I did a few years ago, and we really positioned this as a paper that was saying Mturk could be a viable option for organizational and occupational health research. So I saw a lot of research on using Mturk, for example, doing experimental data. There's a really interesting paper looking at using Mturk as for clinical populations. So there's a lot of research out there, but there wasn't any on occupational health psych. So I wanted to do a paper showing that we could use it for occupational health psych and larger organizational research in general. So we basically went on to Mturk, collected data on 1,500 people. We screened it like any data, we cleaned it, and we had 1,418 participants that provided good, clean data. And this is just a breakdown of the demographics. We can see that on average, these tend to be young professionals, so the average age of 35. They tend to be a little more female, right? So 58%. Anecdotally, I've collected some data since COVID, and I've seen a shift where we've collected several samples and several colleagues have collected samples, and now it's predominantly male, but it's just kind of shifted the other way. Maybe it's about, in those, it was about 60% male. So this is all pre-COVID data. It is still pretty highly white, but as a work family researcher, this is better data for me. It's a more, the sample adequacy is better for the research questions that I'm asking about work family conflict, right? It's really hard to use SONA systems. I don't know if you have SONA systems and collect research. And, like Auburn is very traditional. Everyone is 18 to 22. It's probably 95% white. They all have very high SES backgrounds. Almost all their parents went to college. So it's just not a good generalizable sample for the research that I do. So for me, and I live in a small college town in the South. So for me, I really need these other options. And Mturk might not be the only option, but if I'm going to do a study one, study two, this might be a wonderful study one. And then I can follow it up with organizational data, which a lot of people would kind of refer to as, quote unquote, the gold standard of IO research. But I really view the sample adequacy of Mturk being pretty good. There are downsides. You can see the education. This is a highly educated sample, right? We're looking at 60% with bachelor degrees or higher. So, and I'll go over some of this in a minute, but when I started using Mturk, I was surprised on how many educated, participants there were. But it does make sense when you think about, the people that are going online to take these surveys. So you're not getting a lot of people in agriculture, right? Because they're not at a desk. They're not, so it does make sense. But relationship status, this again is great for me because I do work family research. So this is a survey of 1,500 people. We're not interested in, there's no criteria. They just have to be in the US and 18. Those were the only criteria. And we found that 43% of the sample was married too. So all states, all but one was represented. I forget which one. And it's a pretty broad distribution too. So it's just very representative. So in this paper, we wanted to, again, position Mturk as a good resource for OHP and occupational research. So we broke it down into what were their employment sectors. So we used ONET career clusters, and we found it was pretty representative. So a reviewer wanted us to break it down to the Bureau of Labor Statistics employment data, compare it to the population. And it doesn't match up perfectly such that our career clusters had some others, right, versus the population. But we do see it's pretty representative. So education, marketing, information technology were most represented, a little higher than the normal population. But again, it makes sense because these are people that are on computers. Least represented agriculture, law, architecture. I wasn't surprised by agriculture. And then there's some that just don't overlap perfectly. But overall, it's definitely more representative than a college sample. It's more representative than, say, if I go into, one study that we've done in the past used grocery store workers, I think is a great sample, especially like during COVID. But it's still not representative because it's regional. And then on top of that, they tend to be less educated than the general public. So, each study definitely has pros and cons, but I would say that Mturk does have some pros as far as employment diversity. So again, I'm probably a little biased because I like Mturk as a tool in my toolbox, but I think when it's paired with other data, it can tell a strong story. One question, especially after seeing how educated Mturk workers are, people are like, well, why are they taking these surveys? So there was a study, it was 10 years ago, but they asked that question, why are you taking this survey? And surprisingly, not a lot of people are taking it to make money. So, 5% is just to make ends meet, 12%, it's their primary source of income. So this is potentially a red flag. So in practice, I always make sure I have a screening survey. And one of the questions is, are you employed in outside of Mturk, right? I want to capture those people that only do Mturk for money. And I want to make sure that I capture the people that do work outside of Mturk. So I explicitly ask, are they employed outside Mturk? And then let's see, money is relevant. So a decent number of people really don't care for the money, and most people just find it a good way to kill time and make some money. So and anecdotally, you see people around like holidays do Mturk more often because they're just trying to make some extra money to buy gifts. So Mturk now is, it's legit in the sense that workers get a 1099. So I do believe, though, they can actually get either a 1099 or they can get Mturk credit, like a gift certificate. So I took 13 surveys, for example, and I got a 66-cent Mturk gift card at the end of the month. So you have to kind of cash out monthly now. They keep on changing their employment, parameters, but now you have to check out or cash out monthly. and you can either get paid and you get a 1099, or you can get Mturk credit. And I don't know what the breakdown is, but based on previous studies, I think a decent number of people just do this to get some spending money. So, all right, income breakdown. Again, this is pretty representative. I offhand don't know what the annual income for U.S. workers is. I should know that. So minimum wage is what, $7.25? So that turns out to be, gosh, that's under 20 grand. So what's most interesting here is about 10% make six figures. So there are a lot of people on Mturk that obviously don't need this for the money. You know, I don't think that they're taking surveys to mess with researchers and, you know, provide faulty data. You know, I think what they're doing is they're just killing time and they just enjoy it. So they're taking these surveys. So, all right, hours per week. This is a large representative sample of Mturk workers. So again, it's really important to pre-screen and get the professional Mturkers out, right? So you don't want them in your survey if you're interested in good, you know, generalizability to typical workers. So I would argue that Mturk work is not generalizable to, you know, like those grocery store workers or agriculture or other areas. You know, they're just sitting around. So, but you know, there are people that take a lot of surveys. So hits per week. So each job, right? They do a hit. A lot of these people they're doing this, you know, 20 hits a day. And, you know, again, I think just that's one of the criticisms. So there are some studies out there that show that Mturk is largely driven by a small population. And when I say small population, maybe like 6,000 to 8,000 Mturk workers that are just taking a ton of surveys. But then, yeah, there are, you know, Mturk says there's 1 million workers on there, but a large portion of them are going to be people like me that took 13 surveys and then they're done. So I think the balance is getting not those professional ones, right? But getting the people that are kind of in between, people that work 9 to 5 jobs, but then they go on and maybe do 10 surveys a day just to make some extra money, or they're just bored. You know, a lot of these people are probably at work and they're just taking surveys for fun, making a little extra cash. So income per week. So you're really not getting rich by taking Mturk surveys. So again, a lot of these people are just taking it for fun. So I don't view this as a negative in the sense that people aren't driven to do these surveys by financial means, right? They're doing it for other reasons. And anecdotally, a lot of people, when I post a survey and I try to pay well, which I'll talk about paying a little bit, it's supposed to be anonymous, but they can email you. So that's kind of a hiccup, right? Depending on how strict your IRB is, I always write doing it necessarily to make cash. So advantages, disadvantages. I would argue advantages, access to a broad range of participants. From my selling point would be that organizational diversity. I can get people in a number of jobs. I can get national presence, right? So I can get people from across the United States. I can get a lot of people that are married. And one of the great things is I can pre-screen. And if I'm only interested in folks that have, you know, that are married with children, I could do a pre-screen of 1,000 people, pay them a small, you know, fee to do a demographic survey, you know, 25 cents or 50 cents. And then I can get a subsample and invite, say, 300 or 400 people back to do the actual study. So you can actually target your population much better by doing a pre-screen. And for like my research, having children and being married is a major pro for my study. Or if you're interested in, you know, I don't know, pretty much anything else. So I'll talk about it later. One of the options, they have these criteria where you can pre-select, and one of them is if somebody has a workplace rival. So they actually have that in the data. So I could see that being interesting with like organizational, or not organizational, OCB research, but counterproductive work behavior, right? If somebody has an organizational rival, you could actually pre-screen them for that. It's kind of interesting. Let's see, subject pool diversity, again, diverse range of participants, low overall cost. So, this is kind of I guess, an ethical dilemma. I always try to pay about minimum wage. So if I have a 10-minute survey, I try to pay about $1.25. And really that is a low cost, right? $1.25 to collect 100 participants is pretty cheap. So, but still, I think that's an adequate pay for people. So. And the great thing is you can collect data very, very quickly. So I could do a pre-screen of 1,000 participants and I can collect that in a day. And then if I do a follow-up of 300 participants, I'll invite them and I'll keep it open for a week. But when I invite them back, I probably get 60% of my sample that first day, and then maybe another 20% and then 10%, and then it trickles down. But I can collect a lot of data very quickly. So it's very efficient. Let's see, subject pool access. Another great thing is there is no ebb and flow. So I know a lot of people use Sona, right? So I'm sure that everyone at Wright State uses students. For my research, sometimes what I'll try to do is I'll do kind of it's not really a snowball approach, but it's using students to essentially recruit their parents. And that has been somewhat successful in the sense that because I can't use them for work family research, but if they can locate a working couple, take me 2 semesters to collect a decent sample. So the great thing is I have access to participants very quickly. There is no spring break on Mturk. There is no Christmas break. There's no summer break. So I always have access to these participants. And a lot of times what I'll do is I don't collect data over Christmas break just because I want it to be as generalizable as possible. But I will collect data over spring break. And I can do an entire study, at least if it's a time 1 or time 2, I can do time 1 entirely over my spring break. So there's no recruitment. They're already there. So. And again, subject pool diversity. So it goes more diverse. It still isn't perfect. They're more liberal, they're more educated, but they're definitely more diverse than, say, a Sona system. Also, low cost. So I mentioned we've actually asked questions about how much they want to get paid. And on average, about minimum wage. Everyone is very happy to make minimum wage, and a lot of people actually post like half a minimum wage, but ethically I always try to pay at least minimum wage. So about $1.25 per 10 minutes. And if it's a multiple time study, I will try to bump it up. So if it's time 1, 2, and 3, I might do $1, $1.50, and $2 in order to ensure that time 2 and time 3 has a higher response rate. But yeah. I always try to average at least minimum wage. Sometimes if I do like an ESM study, again, to try to increase that, participant response, I will do a bonus, and you can bonus these people. So you can pay them the $1.50, and $2. And then if they do all 3, you can just bonus them another $1 just out of, your funds. So all the payments are through Amazon Mturk. So it's really, really useful if you have a very bureaucratic university like mine. Payment and procurement here is terrible. So if we try to pay a participant a $50 gift card, they essentially make us have we have to collect Social Security so we can do like a 1099 form. Like no one is going to, they just make so many hurdles for us to jump through. So it's much, much easier through Amazon because it's been approved through our payment and procurement. All I have to do is say, I'm going to pay them through Amazon. Amazon handles it, and I don't have to worry about it because Amazon gives them a 1099 if they make over what, $600. So it's, if you work at a very bureaucratic place like Auburn, this is a fantastic way to get rid of that. So, and then let's see, time cost. Again, it's fast, and you can do longitudinal research. And for longitudinal research, it still turns out to be really inexpensive. So when I've done longitudinal research outside of Mturk, you're looking at least $50 a participant. And if you were going to pay somebody $25 to do, say a 1 week ESM study, they would be incredibly happy. So disadvantages. So any friends? I'm aging myself. So, and actually after I put this in here, I really wish I would have added Ross and Russ. If you remember when Rachel actually dated somebody named Russ that looked exactly like Ross, I thought that was better. But this is Joey, and Joey's, I guess, lesser double. So data quality is an issue. So there are different mechanisms. So, and I'll go through this when you actually set up the HIT, but there's ways to ensure data quality. But on top of what you can do through Mturk, there's all these other things that you will want to do in your actual Qualtrics survey. So you make a Qualtrics survey and link it through Mturk. So I do like the reCAPTCHA to capture bots. I do the insufficient effort responding items that Nathan has a ton of papers on. So I embed those in any self-report survey, and Mturk is no different. So, and actually, I would argue that I think the data quality is better than when I've collected student samples. So ethicality. So, again, I just try to be ethical and make sure that I pay them at least minimum wage. Participant treatment, right? So I try to be conscious. So any study, like any study that passes IRB. So I even pay participants if they drop out because I say ethically I need to pay them. Just like if you had a SONA study, they come in, they say, hey, I'm done. I don't want to participate. You still have to give them credit. At least you do at Auburn. I do the same thing with Mturk. If they decide to leave or they provide really poor data, I still pay them. Sometimes I even get emails, so it's anonymous, but they can email their requester. So I have my grad students and undergrads take the survey before I launch it to determine how long it is. And if they all take it on average, say 9 minutes, I'll say, okay, well, it's a 10-minute survey. Sometimes if I'm sampling 1,000 people, I'm going to get a couple folks that email me saying, hey, I spent 20 minutes. You should have paid more. And what I'll do is I'll just pay out of my own pocket. I'll give them a bonus. I'm sorry, here's an extra $3, or here's an extra $1.25, just to keep them happy. I don't know if I should do that, but I do. But, of course, there is going to be potential sample bias. And that really comes down to them being, they are a weird sample, right? They're Western, they're educated. What did the rest stand for? Industrialized and whatever else. But I would still argue that it's better than a lot of these other samples. Even samples that use MBA students, I think this is going to be a more generalizable sample. But sample adequacy hinges on the questions you're asking. And, I still think it's a good resource. So how to be a requester. This is most of the questions that I get. So I try to spend most of the time on this. So to request an account, you just go on to mturk.com and you request an account. So it is basically, it's run as a business. So when I got to Auburn, I tried to create a lab account. I wanted the work life and organizational effectiveness lab Mturk requester account. And after about 2 weeks of trying to do this, I just gave up and I decided to use my own account. It's my own personal Mturk account, and to make it more professional, I just put doctor in front of it. So now I'm Dr. Jesse S. Michael instead of just requester Jesse S. Michael. And I could probably change the name to Work Life and Organizational Effectiveness Lab and then still have it under me. But what happens is, since it's run as a business, you have to submit your social security and you have to be registered like any job. So when I tried to request it through Auburn, I tried to have my office and my office phone, and I'm trying to explain, there's no one to explain it to, but I don't have, a water bill statement to show that I live at, 209 Thatch Hall. So I was just unable to do it. And after 2 weeks and there's nobody at Mturk to communicate with, I just kept it my personal account. So I think that's fine. I've been doing it for years under my personal account. When you create an account, you also get a worker account. So that's why I have a worker account and a requester account. I use my requester account for everything when I post these. And I only started doing a couple of surveys, 1 week, because I was just interested on what they're going through. I kind of viewed it as my own ethnographic study. Let's see what they're doing. And it's not fun. I got bored, so I didn't make any money. So yeah, just go to Mturk, create an account. When you do this, you have to prepay. So you have to say how many hits, and I'll go over this in a minute, but you have to prepay in order to collect data. So a priority there. And then you put a credit card on file. So I have like my university card when I create a study and I get it approved by IRB. And I also have my personal card if I feel bad because somebody took 20 minutes to take a survey that should have been 10. I just pay them extra. And I don't know why I do that. Well, I do know why I do that. I'll go over it in a minute because worker is not surprised when they get 112 items and it just said short survey. So I don't want them upset, or dropping out. I want to make sure they actually complete it. So I tend to be as descriptive as possible, tell them exactly what they're going to do. So keywords, I put in keywords, obviously, that are descriptive. So things that they could search for, because you saw there's about 1,000 surveys. So some people will probably do the search from most recent. Others will do it for the most money. Others that are just taking these for fun might type in keywords that they want to do. So, experiment, psychology, questionnaire, survey, work, family, any of these things that would be appropriate for you. So I've even collected just out of, sometimes I've done studies just for fun. So I did a political paper about 4 years ago, trying to figure out what's going on and why people did certain things. So I went to Mturk and it was a question over coffee. I bet it was basically saying, people that have certain biases, right? Like victimization bias or derogation bias would vote certain ways. So we just collected data on it. And we did that with an IRB and we collected data on Mturk just for fun. We ended up publishing it, not in the great journal, but that was just for fun. So I even use Mturk just for fun. So it's a good thing about being tenured, right? All right, creating your hit. So this is basically how much you would pay them. So again, just be ethical. That's my best advice. I aim for minimum wage. So most surveys are about 10 minutes, so about 25. You're going to get plenty of people and they're going to be happy. So you could pay them less, and research shows that it isn't going to affect the data quality, but it will affect the speed in which you get data. So again, I could do a survey, I could do a pre-screen and pay them, a quarter versus 50 cents. And I have 1,000 people, and I might get the data in one day if I pay them 50 cents. Actually, I'd probably get the data in about 3 hours. And it might take 2 days if I pay them a quarter. So it just starts to slow down and kind of trickles in towards the end. So I just figure, pay a little more, keep them happy, get the data much quicker. I will say for grad students, they don't want to pay them as much. So it is a little like, oh no, just pay them. We'll just pay them, So, all right. Why else do you want to pay them a little more? Because Turkers are an interesting community of people. So my little ethnographic study of trying to take some surveys and figure out what they're doing also spiraled into this, there's this whole like culture of Turkers out there, and they have their own websites like Turkicon, where they go on, they have Reddit forums, and they communicate with each other about hits that are really lucrative, or hits that are really easy, or requesters that are really easy or fair. And I'm actually on some of these. So, and they basically say, oh, here's an ESM study that you should really get on because it pays $50 for 1 week's work. And they're only bringing in 200 people. Or, oh, definitely don't take this study because they said it takes 10 minutes and they're paying 50 cents, but it really took 20 minutes. So they will go on there and they actually rate people. It's kind of like a rate my professor, but for Mturk. And once you're kind of on here, you don't really want, that to impact the quality of your data or people not taking it. So it was kind of surprising. All right, creating your hits. So here you're just going to say how many unique workers. So again, I've collected up to 1,500 workers without a problem. So if you were going to go on and collect like 5,000, I don't think you'd ever need that. It would really start trickling in because it is a nonlinear. You get a ton of people up front and then it slows down. But typically what I'll do if I do like a 3-wave study and I'm going to do time 1, 2, and 3, I do a pre-screen of about 1,000 people, hoping that I get to invite about 500 back. And then I want to end with about, 250, 300 people. So, all right, time. So depending on your study, I will normally say like 8 hours, because what happens is a lot of times you get people that are taking this at work and they might start or they might accept a hit in the morning and then they don't have to start it. They just accept it. So they're holding their spot for Mturk, right? So you say 1,000 people can take this. And this is even more important if you have smaller samples, right? So if you're doing like an experiment and you only have, 100 people and they go into 2 different conditions of 50, they're going to go in, and especially if it's paid well, they're going to reserve their spot. So they're going to accept the hit, but they can go do their work, go have lunch, and then they come back. And if you have a 1-hour hit, what happens a lot of times is they'll accept it and then they won't be able to come back and finish it. So I normally do like 8 hours, but I don't want it too long where they maybe start a survey and then come back and then finish it the next day. I want them to take it in one sitting. So there is ways to make the hit available, but then they still have to finish it in a certain number of hours or minutes through Qualtrics. So, but if I'm doing an ESM study, I would do like 1 hour because I send it to them in the morning and I want to make sure that they complete it in the morning. So I'm doing an ESM study right now and we have like a 1-hour window where they take it in the morning, 1-hour window right after lunch, another 1-hour window before they leave work, and then another hour window in the evening. So. All right, and then this really doesn't matter either with the hits, but I normally say 7 days, but I'm going to collect my data within a couple of days. But this just tells it how long do you want it to keep the study available on Mturk until they take it down. And then you can auto approve their payments. So I'll just do like 2 days or 3 days, but I always approve the payment. So again, I'm just trying to keep the participants happy, and I approve it within typically a couple hours. And I'm online looking at how the data roll in. So I'm all excited, like, oh, look, I got another 100 participants. Okay, let me pay them. So, and then they'll go on to their little Mturk community and say, Dr. Jesse S. Michael paid me within an hour, and the survey only took 10 minutes, and I got paid $1.25. Recommend them. So, and then here, worker requirements. So I've never used this. So Mturk has kind of this algorithm that identifies master workers. So this is important. So no one knows what this master worker requirement is. So I never use it, but I set the number of hits that they have to have completed to either 50 or 100. I've been using 100 a lot. And then I require the number of hits that have to be completed successfully to about 95. And there's a number of studies that show in order to get good quality data, this kind of threshold of 95% completion rate of acceptable and 100 hits is generally kind of that, that criteria to ensure that it's good quality data. There is some studies that have come out saying you're kind of limiting it to those master with not, these master workers, but you're limiting it to those people that do Mturk a lot. And we want these naive Mturk workers, especially if you're doing more like experimental data. For me, it's not a big deal because I just do survey data and I ask questions about their workplace, their family, their work performance, their family performance satisfaction, etc. But if you're designing like an experiment where you need maybe participants that are a little more naive, right, to do that study, maybe you could use a lower threshold because it's going to be new for them. I could see that argument that if you're using workers that do a lot of these studies, the likelihood in the US. So definitely, if you want US workers, ensure that it is US, US criterion. Also, you could do a number of others. So there's here you can see this pricing detail. I have a comment in a couple of slides, but they have what they refer to as premium qualifications. So you can select people that are employed full time. You could select people that do, if you're doing a study on like stock market use, they have items about premium qualifications for people that use the, invest in stock market. Pretty much any interesting qualification they've already screened for. So here's kind of the best practices, 95% or higher, and then typically like 50 or 100 hits or more. The location, always do the US. I always encourage to have screening questions in there because there are people that could sneak in that are outside the US, but they use like IP farms, if you've heard of this. So there's ways to screen those. So like if you put it in your IRB, they can't screen for geographical location, so you can find them through like latitude, longitude data coordinates. You could technically do that if the IRB approves it. I'm going to show you another option in a few minutes where Cloud Research is basically a third party that identifies IP farms and blocks them. So every time that somebody creates a way to get around, certain barriers, there's other third parties that create ways to block them. So, all right. So here are some of the premium qualifications. These basically range from 5 cents to 50 cents per qualification. The only one I ever use is full-time workers. So I will often do that because reviewers are going to want to know that these people are actually employed outside of Mturk. So but I use that premium qualification. I pay, I think it's 35 cents per participant. And then on top of that, I end up screening too, because they may have filled out the survey saying they're employed full time, but they've since lost their job. And then I just do a pre-screen, I pay them, and I make sure. All right, and then in order to make it available, you can just make it public, private, or hidden. So everything that I showed you previously was public, even if I didn't have access to it. Sometimes, you can make it private, so only everyone will see it, but they can only see the description if they qualify, and then hidden, they only see it if they're qualified. So I used to make mine public, but now I just make mine hidden. In that way, I get less emails about, hey, could I take your study? I'm a great participant, but I'm new. Or, hey, I didn't participate in study 1, but I really want to take study 2. I could take study 1 now. So I just make it hidden to get rid of those emails. And then here's a design. So this is a snapshot from Mturk. So you do all enter your study properties and then your study layout. So this is pretty straightforward. It's just kind of the advertisement. And then after that, you put in your survey link from Qualtrics and you provide a code. So they open up the HIT in Mturk. They complete the survey, and at the end of the survey, I give them a code that they then put back into Mturk. And some people would use the payment. I, again, just approve everyone, but it's a way to kind of provide some face validity of me checking the data. So I always try to make sure that, there's these different mechanisms to screen for data. And this is just one of those ways, saying only people that provide this at the end of the study will get paid. So, all right. And then here's the ad. Again, I try to make this Mturk listing as explicit as possible. So I put my name in there. I show that it's from my lab, even though it's my personal Mturk account. Complete a 120 item survey, so I make it explicit so they're not shocked. And then the keywords, and then I provide a study overview, and I only provide enough detail where they couldn't fake anything. So here I pre-screen for people living in the US and that are 18 or older, right? If I did that qualification, and actually a lot of times if I did a qualification, I could include this here, but I still won't include the qualification because I want to catch anyone that no longer works full time. So typically I just put these qualifications in. If it's a study 2, I'll put in, and you participated in the previous study from last week titled so-and-so, but only the people that completed that study can see it. So I just make sure that I'm not getting those people that are going to fake, right? Like, oh, you're interested in workers, or you're interested in people that are married. Well, unless you pre-screen for it, don't put it in the advertisement. Any comments or questions about Mturk? And then I was going to very quickly talk about a third-party vendor that I have no affiliation with that I started using recently that I'm really, really happy with using. And the reason I use them is because I can email participants anonymously and do follow-up longitudinal research. I used to be able to do this through Mturk, through various R code. And I've talked to a lot of Mturk researchers, and our theory is that the people that created the R code are affiliated with this company, and they have hence taken the R code away. So the R code is no longer available, and it won't work. So we don't have a mechanism to email these Mturk workers anymore unless we use this third party. So if anyone's heard of a company called Turk Prime, so a article came out about 3 or 4 years ago in So it's a legit company. You essentially give them control of your Mturk account, but I have experienced no issues with it. And there's a Prime panel and an Mturk Toolkit. I do not use the Prime panel. The Prime panel is essentially them going through Mturk, Qualtrics, survey response, and every other online forum, and they position it as really this optimal, survey research tool that has access to, they say something like 50 million participants. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what they say. There's a lot of, like white papers out on using Turk Prime or Cloud Research. But I use it for this Mturk Toolkit. And here's the behavioral research methods paper that came out talking about Turk Prime. So the Mturk Toolkit basically breaks Mturk down into an even more user-friendly interface. I think, Nathan, we talked about it. You used this once. So basically, it breaks it down into these 9 tabs. And the first one is optional, and that just corresponds to all those Mturk, like those categories that you pay for, right? Those 5 to 50 cent categories. And the ones that are most relevant for us would be these 8. So if you go into occupation, you can pick specific occupations. Status would be like employment status, the type of industry, if they're college students or not, if they have a direct supervisor, how many hours they work. And normally, like Mturk will say, do they work 35 hours or more, or they work 30 less than 35 hours, or are they unemployed? This actually breaks it down into greater categories, so you can actually be more precise. And then the most interesting one, I've never used this, but I might in the future, is if you have a workplace rival, which is really interesting. It could be interesting for CWB research. So they pre-screen people, and they have this data on these different organizational characteristics. And then this is just a screenshot from Cloud Research. And as you can see, this is identical to Mturk. They basically just have, they're basically just making money off of making Mturk easier. One nice thing about this is, for example, I'm doing an ESM study right now, and we basically have people across the United States in time zones. So we're looking at, Eastern, Central. So we use 4 different time zones, and we send out a morning survey to people that are in Eastern. Then we send out a morning survey an hour later to people in Central. And then an hour later, another survey, and an hour later, another survey. So what we can do is actually set it up where instead of us sitting at a computer all day, is we can create launch times for subsets within this sample. And we can set out 4 morning surveys, and then 4 noon surveys, and then 4 p.m. surveys, and then 4 like 8 p.m. surveys. And we can set this all up so it all goes out on clockwork. So it's fantastic for ESM studies. And then I can also set it up where they get prepaid easily. I know I'm probably going kind of long. What's really great for using this Cloud Research is I can include or exclude previous surveys. So one of the things that you get from researchers is, say if you did a scale development, and I do scale development a lot, and if I do an EFA study followed by a CFA study, I want to ensure that I have independent samples. And also, I'm going to do large samples that might have, 600, 800 participants, especially if it's a long survey. I want a certain number of people per items. So I'm going to do an EFA study, and I could do this through Mturk. And then I do a follow-up CFA study, and I want to exclude everyone in the CFA study that participated in the EFA study. So I can just go through and exclude the previous survey. And automatically, because I just got a review back, I forget where it was, maybe like JOHP, and one of the reviewers was really concerned that, our EFA and our CFA have overlap. So I just need to make it more explicit that we excluded those people from the EFA and the CFA. But what's even better is if you do a longitudinal study, and I have, say, a pre-screen of 1,000 people, and then I want to invite 500 people back to study one, I can explicitly email those 500 people. So I can create my survey, have it launch at a certain time, and then I can put their Mturk IDs in here, the lower one, that is my include list, and I can invite these 100 people specifically with a link to that study. So that's going to, dramatically increase my ability to do longitudinal research. And this was available through our code, through AWS and Mturk, until they essentially pulled that our code away. So you can no longer do that. And then another thing, which is kind of neat, I just started doing this, is a pro feature. You can do what's called hyperbatch. So I'll talk about compensation in a bit, but Mturk charges a 40% administrative fee, which really isn't bad. But it's 40% for, if you have 10 participants or more, which is everyone, right? Or 20% if you have 9 participants or fewer. So these folks basically created a way in order to do what they call hyper batches. So if you have 1,000 participants that you want to partake in your study, they would create 112 hits or batches that each include 9 hits, or they would create 112 hits that include 9 participants. And this is a way for them, and they launch them simultaneously. And that way you only have to pay Mturk 20%. So you pay that lower fee, which is great. But then they charge you back that 20% in their administrative fees. So this is a cost. So whatever you pay the participants, say if you pay them $1, you're then going to pay 40% on top of it. So, 1,000 participants for $1 is going to cost you $1,400. Cloud research isn't going to cost you any more, especially if you do that hyper batch, but it's going to turn out to be about the same because you then pay a cloud research fee. So their software fees, their payment fee, their panel fee. It turns out to be, if you don't do the panel fee, it's a little less, but then you have to pay them separately. So I mentioned Auburn is a stickler for payment and procurement. They've approved Mturk, but they haven't approved cloud research. So what happens is I will pay the 120% fees to Mturk, and then I'll just pay the cloud research personally. Just for payment and procurement, that it's easier for them. But each time talking about payments, I always do like a spreadsheet, and I'll kind of create something like this, where, okay, I'm going to screen for 100 people. I'm going to do a 50-cent pre-screen. How much does it really cost? It's going to be 140%. So that pre-screen is going to be $70. I'm going to invite, after screening, 505 people back. This is real data. So this is what I did at time 1, thinking, okay, well, I'm going to invite 500 people back that match my criteria. And I hope I get an 80% return for time 1, 2, and 3. That would end up being about 250 people. That's pretty good. And this study will cost me about $2,700, which really isn't bad, I don't think. So. All right, I think that's the time I was allotted. I might have gone over by 5 minutes. So should I try turning my camera back on?
Sure, go ahead.
Did I freeze?
Yeah, you did a few times, but that's okay.
All right. I don't even have snow here, but at least we have heat and power. So yeah, I guess
I have a question, Jesse.
Yeah.
What reviewer comments do you often get in regards to Mturk? Is there any pushback? And when you do get pushback, what sort of responses do you have to address those comments?
So I think, it's still probably anecdotal because it's only been, my experiences. So like the one that I just mentioned, I thought I made it pretty clear, but we had a scale development project and I knew that there were issues. So it's basically 6 studies and 4 of them are Mturk, right? and it's a student lead author, and I'm second. She's already gone out, and I want to get this published, so we haven't collected a final study, which was going to be a working non-Mturk sample. So I knew there was going to be some pushback. And that response was, Mturk is a small population of people that do a lot of surveys. And how do I know that the people that are in your CFA are not the same people that were in your EFA? And I just, that's probably, on my part, I need to make it more clear that the people that participate in the EFA were explicitly excluded from the people that completed the CFA, right? So each time I collected data, they were therefore we need to follow it up with, standard organizational study. I personally would argue that, I don't think one's worse than the other. But just pairing them, I think that's the easiest way to get around it. Do a 2-part study, do an Mturk study and a follow-up study. But then like JP, they did that special call for COVID-19 research, right? Research recommendations or reviewer recommendations, and it explicitly says, be conscious of the sampling approach and that you need to be flexible given it's a pandemic. And to answer these questions, we need to be open to all research. And they explicitly say Mturk is okay, if it addresses the question. So, yeah, I think those are the main things. For a while, people were concerned about bots because apparently there was an article about bots infiltrating Mturk. So we're just explicit about screening data, right? So we use a reCAPTCHA to screen for bots. We just use insufficient effort to screen for bots in different types. So ones that wouldn't be detectable by bots. So I think those are the main ones that I've come across. So it's so weird not seeing people. I'm still not used to being completely virtual. So I did have to hang up an Auburn flag to better represent my university. Of course, this is the office is the where everything ends up. So it's the guest room / office / music room / whatever else.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Are there any other questions? All right, thanks again for sharing your experience with Mturk. I think this is really helpful.
All right, yeah. If anyone has questions, I can provide additional feedback, or if you have questions about citations. I was trying to be very citation light. I got my COVID shot, so I was out for most of the week. So that second dose, it's a doozy. Yeah. So I just try to stick to the main points versus having a lot of citations. But I have a lot of citations if you need those.
Jesse, this is Valerie. Thank you very much for your presentation. Can you post your slides or send your slides to us?
Yeah.
There's a lot of very helpful how-to stuff there that you've experienced.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'll send them to Nathan afterwards.
Yeah. If you send them my way, I'll send them out to the department.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, thanks again.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.